Hello. Obviously, the big news in Ukraine today is the total failure of the Kakhovka Dam and the hydroelectric power plant situated there. We can have a bit of a look on the map here. You can see the city of Kherson here, and this is in the Kherson Oblast, and the Kakhovka hydroelectric dam here. It's about 60 kilometres northeast, upstream on the Dnipro river. And what has happened in the last day is that the dam wall has failed and progressively has deteriorated to the point such that the failure has become quite catastrophic. There's a few pictures here. You can see some early shots here showing how the water was just... Let me just move this here. Some early shots showing here how the original damage was done just in this small area here. And there was a minor amount of water flow occurring. What seems to have happened is that as the water has been able to pour through the damaged area there, it's begun to fatigue and destabilize and ultimately crumble away the dam wall. If we look here to some other photos from later in the day, earlier, just a few hours ago, you can start to see here now how the amount of damage has increased substantially, and there's really just free flowing of the dam water across the wall, with an image here of what that area did look like, what that dam wall did look like when it was intact prior to the failure. Now, what is interesting is the cause of the dam wall failure. At this stage, Ukrainian authorities are blaming the Russians for having destroyed the dam. The Russians are blaming the Ukrainians, and at this stage, I don't think anyone, other than those who have actually performed it, actually can tell us what happened there, how it happened. I have seen some interesting discussions that there may have been a more natural cause here, in that the dam wall itself may not have been well maintained over the last few years, and that a recent decision by the Ukrainians to spike or increase the amount of water held within the dam may have led to an almost natural failure. However, I have also seen some footage, which I believe was footage taken from Russian soldiers. Russia is currently controlling the area that the dam is in, and have been maintaining that for some time, controlling that area, not maintaining the dam, but controlling that area. And the footage that I saw seemed to come perhaps from someone in this area of the buildings, or perhaps just a little further to the right of what we can see in this shot here. And they seemed to run out quickly as if they were being shelled. And then sure enough, just on the water's edge, there was an explosion, which you might expect to see if a shell had landed in the water. Now, there have been ongoing reports that the hydroelectric power station has been shelled by Ukraine for some time. So there are reports in the Russian media that this has been going on for some time. There were also, at the end of last year, in November of 2022, if you remember, the Russian forces made a tactical retreat from the Kherson region, where they had been in this area around here, on the on the eastern bank, the eastern side of the Dnipro river. They had actually crossed over into the western side of the Dnipro river. But the Russians feared that the Ukrainians may actually blow this dam and cause flooding and force them to be then trapped on the western side of the river. What happened back in November was that the Russians then did retreat and made a very successful retreat across the Dnieper to the eastern side, and have set up defensive lines on the eastern side of the river down through here. What has happened since the dam has been blown is we can see these areas of red are indicating where flooding is occurring. Just have a look. Where are we? Oh, I don't have a picture of it here showing the actual flooded area. Oh, here we go. So if we just look in here, I'll make this a little bigger for us. You can see the area where the hydroelectric plant is here, where the wall has failed, and then the area heading down to here to Kherson. The area in red is the area that's considered to be at least partially or fully flooded at this stage, and this is in the few hours since the dam has really begun to sort of flow. You can also see the massive amount of water contained upstream of this dam. So there's not going to be any quick resolution to this. Obviously, what water is in the reservoir will need to flow through and will flood the region below, which is obviously going to lead to massive damage to the townships in this area. For the Kherson region, the city there, what seems to be the case is that the bulk of the flooding is occurring on the eastern side, on the lower side here, more so than on the western side. So the Ukrainian forces holding the western side here, the Russian forces have been forced to move back and form new defensive lines. They haven't had to move too far thus far, and the reports are that they have been able to establish new frontline defensive lines there. What we've also learnt is that higher up, behind this main reservoir, there are another 5 dams up there, and that these could also, if they were to fail, could cause additional flooding down into this area, and that there may be some tactical military reasons for that to occur. But before I get into that, the big question, of course, is who's done this and why. So if we consider the story of perhaps the Russians having blown this dam, then the one reason that seems to be beneficial for the Russians, if they were to have done this, is that it would, by flooding this area down here, form a barrier to where the Ukrainians may be looking to move across the Dnipro and begin to attack and make their way across to Crimea, across to the Azov Sea. So this would provide some sort of a natural barrier and a slowing down of the Ukrainians. However, given the reports from what appears to be perhaps the start of the Ukrainian offensive in the last 2 days, if the Russian reports are to be believed, then the Russians would not seem to be in any need to be slowing down the Ukrainian offensive. In fact, the reports of Ukrainian losses over the last 2 days have been quite staggering, if you do believe the Russian reports, with 28 tanks destroyed, over 1,500 men killed, allegedly, over 100 smaller armoured sort of personal carrier vehicles and Humvees and these type of things, a number of French tracked wheeled tanks. So if those figures are correct, then the need for the Russians to want to slow down any Ukrainian offensive activity in this area seems to be small. Also, the Crimean Peninsula draws its water from this reservoir. On the map that we can see here, the North Crimean Canal. The North Crimean Canal down there feeds into Crimea, and in 2014, when the dispute started, what we found was that the Ukrainians did in fact dam that and stop that flow to Crimea. Crimea was receiving up to 85% of its water through that canal from this reservoir prior to it being blocked in 2014. The Russians in 2022, last year, reopened that up and established that water supply back to Crimea. So that's something which would seem to negatively impact the Russian cause and make it unlikely that they may have wished to have destroyed the dam to cause this flooding. If we look at why the Ukrainians may have wished to have done this, or whether perhaps the Ukrainian shelling of the dam wall may have caused this, whether it was actually planned to really cause this much damage right now, or if it was just a lucky shelling strike caused enough initial damage that some water began to flow, and that then subsequently caused the what often happens with dam walls, once they break and lose some of their structural integrity, water flow begins to pull from the other side of the dam and cause cavitation problems with water flow bouncing, which will weaken the structure, and you end up in a catastrophic failure. So who knows if it was intended, or if it may have just happened somewhat accidentally, if not recklessly. But it would also coincide with the fact that if these Russian reports of these heavy Ukrainian losses in the last 2 days are to be believed, that perhaps the delay that this may cause, or the reason to delay further offensives, which the Ukrainians will now be able to claim by saying that they're blocked by water, they can't get across these areas easily. This could become a useful excuse for not proceeding at this stage, while they perhaps regroup, reassess their offensive, if in fact it does seem to have been repelled to the extent that the Russians are claiming it has been repelled. There's some other things, interesting things to consider from this failure of this dam wall, which is that wheat prices, futures have jumped today by 3 and a bit %. And this is due to large numbers of wheat silos and storage facilities for Ukrainian grain being stored in this eastern side of the Kherson region. So while damage at the moment is not known in terms of the impact, even if the wheat in the silos has not been washed away in some cases, it will now be trapped for a period of time, and it's possible that it may be suffering some sort of water damage once mold or rot starts to get into those silos. It'd be very difficult to safely separate that out and then be able to on-sell only some of that. So the market's reacted to that with wheat prices or wheat futures going up. The North Crimean Canal, as we're saying, is not the only canal coming off that reservoir of water. There are a number of other ones which provide irrigation to farmland areas around this area. So not only is there flooding downstream, but also upstream and on the western side, there are large areas which now would quite likely see restricted water flows, or possibly entirely limited water flows, depending on the levels that the dam gets to. So as the amount of destruction of the dam wall continues, the level obviously of the reservoir will begin to lower. Now, depending on where the irrigation canals draw from, at what height they're drawing from the sides of the reservoir, will impact how badly they're affected. As we say, there are more dams upstream of this, and they could be opened to allow water to flow through, to perhaps help try to flow water into those canals. However, until this main damage to this wall is repaired, then any water released at that stage would just continue downstream and not be effective, perhaps in even filling those canals. All right, so that is a big thing for today. I might do another one in a little bit, just on some of the battle news that has happened over the last couple of hours with a bit more detail. Sorry, the last couple of days with a bit more detail about that. But that's it for today for the dam failure.